Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive.
Got like 10 of these.
From every phone you've ever had. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
So I read an article from someone that I really respect with having to do with the brain and stuff. And he said the worst thing in the world was the ear pods and what they do to the brain.
I just heard that too.
And he did a very small, simple experiment with his son holding, I think just was a radio and a meter. And they hadn't even started the experiment. The thing was going crazy. And he looked at his dad and he goes, look, and he filmed it. And he says, it's kind of shocking because we haven't even started. It's going off and he's 5 feet away. So as he got closer, the thing was going through the roof. And he said, your brain is absorbing all of that. Think about it. We talk in our car in Bluetooth and things that we've never done before. And I was like, wow, that's mind blowing. Yes, it's convenient. It's pretty cool. But I said, I have enough head injury stuff. I don't need that. And so when I go train around the facility, I have it on. People are like, what's up with that?
Look at the nerd with the headphones.
Yes. So part of it for me is I'm not willing to risk it. I had this conversation with myself about it. I'm just not willing to risk it. I like it. I have it. There are times when it seems like it's more convenient. Like if I'm on a plane watching a movie or something, even though I can connect to my tablet. It was mind blowing because I just came across that just accidentally. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go with these. And of course, it's almost like these are not meant to last forever. Apple made a sort of an endpoint for these. And I don't know if it's 3 months, 6 months, but the right one just stops working. It just stops working. And there's nothing that you can do. I have a friend who manages the Apple store here in Fort Lauderdale. And he says, when you come by next time, come on in. He actually gave me a pair. He goes, I want you to try this and tell me what you think. These are like the brand new ones. But he said, it's Apple. Apple never designed those to last forever. It's just like a water pump in a car. It only goes 100,000 miles and then that's it. Doesn't matter how much maintenance you do. It's the piece itself. So all the internal components here are not meant to last forever. It's an Apple thing, right? It's meant for you to keep buying and then keep accessorizing to the next level. Ear pods are more expensive. These are $19, right?
Pods are $150, right?
Correct. And they were like $249 when they started, and then they came down. So it's not the money thing. I think it's just I want to try and keep all these insults out of my brain if I can, as much as I can for as long as I can. And we'll see. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But that was pretty telling because you could see in the meters. It's a guy with his son. He's not trying to sell you anything. He doesn't dislike Apple or ear pods or anything. He's just, hey, this is something I just found out. I'm an engineer. Here's something that we found out. And I think that something's bad here. And the answer is yes, it's something's bad there.
And I wonder, you mentioned it was always the right earphone, and that's the one that has the microphone on that side. So I wonder if it's something to do with the resistance from the microphone.
Correct. That's exactly what it is. It's the right one. It's never the left one. It's always the right one.
Look at us solving the problems of the world, George.
It's interesting because I had just gone to train this morning at the facility, and everybody there has the latest, the ones that go around the neck, and they're like, it is what it is.
I know, it's our brains.
But yeah, no, it's just if you've had the amount of problems I've had with my head, you just don't want to go there. You don't want to do that again. And so whatever it is that it takes to not do that again, even if it's very micro adjustments, I'm going to make the micro adjustments and we'll see. We'll see. I told somebody about it and it made so much sense that I saw his kids at the field where we do our stuff. He was playing soccer and I said, I see he's got the cable. He goes, yeah, we're done with AirPods. He's an attorney. He goes, it just made so much sense when I saw it that I looked at my wife. I'm like, what are we doing? We're accessorizing to the next level. We're putting ourselves in harm. And she says, that's why I told you about the Bluetooth in the car. It's a big antenna we're riding under. That doesn't make any sense. No wonder there's brain cancer going all over the place and just cancers in general. We never had this 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe 10 years. Yeah. But it just, our parents never had this problem. They never had this. That's why it's so telling and it's so simple that we're just not, it can't be that. It is that. It's really that simple. That's why you have this resurgence of people going back to living a simple life because it works, because that's the way the parents didn't have all the answers. But that aspect of it, they just didn't deal with all those health maladies that we have now. They just didn't.
George, have you read the book The Comfort Crisis by Michael
Yes.
Easter? It's so good. There's so much change in evolutionarily the forces that are acting on us in just the last 100 and some years. No wonder we're all messed up.
The guys at Summer Strong are very connected to him because they're all into bow hunting and stuff, and that's what he was doing. And one of the conversations around the table one day was the fact that when he did the research for the book and was taken out on this elk hunt, and elk hunting it's very physically demanding. You're hiking in deep, hard terrain, carrying a pack for 7 or 8 days, and then you have to carry out the meat. I've done it twice, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It really is. It changes you. And he said, the preparation to get there, he said, I did my stairs with my backpack and stuff. None of that prepares you for the wind, the rain, the cold that you don't have in the gym doing the Stairmaster with your backpack on. And you just quickly start to realize, wow, like this is brutal. This is really hard. And it does two things. One, it builds you in many ways, or it just breaks you down completely. You're like, I'm never going to do this again. And you mentioned that to some people, and they're like, yeah, I don't even want to try that. But he said just the act of doing that, how much it changed him, how much it changed his thinking of, I'm doing all these things that don't matter in the gym. Like none of the stuff aesthetic wise is helping me go and hunt an elk. None of that stuff. Stairmaster stuff. He goes, if you really want to learn what it's like to go out and hunt an elk, you're going to have to go and hunt an elk and do some training and stuff. And then next year you start to realize, okay, what are the things that I need? It was strength, it was endurance, was it aerobic capacity, and then start building a little bit. But the way you get better at elk hunting is you go elk hunting, right? It's not a secret. Is you look at these guys and they do look rugged. Look the way that you think they're supposed to look if they're going to hunt elk. That's the best way I can put it to you. They don't look like your supervisor target. They're very rugged, but they don't look like Superman by any means, but they are. These guys' work capacity is unbelievable. Like they're trekking your stuff out if you can't do it, and they'll carry your pack out. That's part of the agreement. You pay for the money. You pay for the trip. But the ability to do that, it's always fascinating. These guys, and that's what he said, these guys were just hardened individuals, humans, not necessarily just men, humans. Like these guys could do things that I could never do, but they never spent very much time in the gym. It was all basically whatever they did transfer to the hunting, which is hunting. He has a hunting show. That's all he does 24/7. That's what he's known for. But if you look at him, he doesn't look like much, but it's a concept of work capacity. So what Michael Easter does now is his whole thing is rucking. Like he's built this following of how I changed my life and everything, rucking. And that's what everybody's now elevated to doing, which is, okay, this transfer to life. We carry things. I think there is a characterization of the physical demands of firefighting. Glenn, I think it was 1992. And he talks in there, what are the 3 things that are most executed on the fireground? And it was lifting and carrying, right? And you know that to be true. Lifting, carrying, pulling objects, and working with objects in front of the body. So if you're talking
Absolutely.
about building work capacity and you're going and doing a muscle head workout, it's not really ticking those boxes. It might help you if you're on a back day, you're pulling objects. But the rest of the stuff, you have to work specifically in order for it to transfer. And that's what he found with rucking, is rucking seemed to just make me better at everything because it increases work capacity, right? So when I look at somebody now, it's probably part of the conversation. We can revisit it. But if I'm going to work with somebody now, I really don't I change the variables in strength training, but everybody's in the gym anyway. That's what they do. They're muscle heads. But I specifically look at increasing work capacity. I specifically look at mobility because nobody does that. And I specifically look at building aerobic endurance because nobody does that. Work capacity is just the ability to perform and then adapt from that performance, to be able to do more work in less time. Rucking helps that. And if you did nothing but that and fought fire, it helps. And it makes me think about that conversation we've had about fit to fight fire. You don't need to be fit to fight fire. These guys have never done a push-up, can pull that 1 3/4 inch, go into a warehouse 300 feet deep and pull the fire out and come out like nothing. But a lot of these guys, what do they do when they're off duty? They work with their hands, right? They may have a job that is about lifting and carrying. Most of the stuff that they carry is in front. They don't do a lot of pushing. They do a lot of pulling. And so you start seeing that there's a pattern here. These guys are actually training for the job, not really in the gym, just by virtue of doing life. The guy that won the combat challenge about 20 years ago, he was just a monster. Brian Spalding. You know how Brian Spalding trained for the combat challenge? He used to run after deer in the woods.
I was going to guess he was a farm boy, but running after deer is even better.
And if you look at him, you're like, that's the guy from Wyoming. That's where he was from. He's from Wyoming, the rugged guy, a handlebar mustache, but just look at him and this guy can survive the apocalypse. But that's the way he trained. He did some gym stuff. Back to that, that was him building work capacity. It wasn't just aerobic stuff. That was his interval training. When the deer went right, he went left, and it just worked for him. You and I probably couldn't reproduce that, but it goes back to the concept of whatever you do, hopefully transfers, whether it's police, fire, or military. That's what I do, is I build work capacity because they don't have it. We do mobility stuff because everybody needs it. The more I do it, the more I realize I just feel good. What did I do? And invariably, it was not strength training. It wasn't aerobic stuff. It's the mobility stuff that you just have to get on the ground. One of the things we don't do is we don't get on the ground. We're adverse to being on the ground. But guess what? You're going to be on the ground at some point. You have to be able to get up. It's beautiful. It's fascinating.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that Summer Strong and the Michael Easter connection. About 2 weeks ago, I was watching some videos on Instagram, and this guy that looked to be very special forces-esque was pontificating on our lifespan is longer than ever, but our health span is shorter. And he just kept going, and I'm like, that's Michael Easter's book. And I was waiting for the punchline.
Interesting.
I am summarizing the comfort crisis, but it never came, and he never gave any credit. So me being me, I commented and I said, hey, is this a summary of the comfort crisis? I didn't see the credit. And he didn't answer. So then I was like, oh, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And so I looked through my list of friends, and I found that my friend Casey from Tacticalories was friends with Michael Easter. So I reached out to Casey, and then it all circled back. But now that all makes sense. It's the Summer Strong connection.
Correct. And those guys they're very hardy. What I like about that group is that they believe in masculinity, maybe to a fault. And you know that because you've been there. That's very macho oriented and that kind of stuff. But it really, what I liked about it was this push to not let masculinity go, because it's important. Not that masculinity means that you're more important than women are, but kids need good fathers, right? That's really, these are all good dads, like that I saw there. You could see that was an important thing for them. They wanted their kid to learn about all these making knives, because it's almost like this culture of manliness is being poo-pooed. The new woke society, the idea of what that means for men is a more masculine or effeminate man, not a more masculine man. And so these guys don't want that to go. And they're holding on to it, and they're building this community of like-minded men that like those things. It's almost like they all like the same thing. We all do. But I really enjoyed the fact that guys, over and above, they want to keep this culture alive for their children, so that their children are hardened, because who knows if the apocalypse is coming, but we need strong people, hence Summer Strong. It's fascinating to see it that way. I like to see it from that angle. Maybe it's a little bit myopic versus these are a bunch of grunting guys that just like to go on, lift. It's that too, right? It's that too.
I'm sure you probably saw my friend Sarah Johnson was there and she did
Yes.
the deadlift competition. Oh my
She's
gosh.
phenomenal.
She's an amazing woman. I'm going to have her on
She
the
is
podcast.
absolutely phenomenal. A monster.
Such a strong monster. That's the best way to describe her.
She did not disappoint. Let's put it that way.
No, she's a wonderful person. George, I'm actually going to leave all of that in. Is all of that such great conversation? I'm an introist and we're going to keep going. We're going to keep rolling. Hey, everyone, welcome back to the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. We are finally on episode 16. And if you're listening on the day it releases, it's December 13th. So about 2 weeks until Christmas. And I'm here with my friend, Jorge Carvajal. George, say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
George and I actually recorded a couple weeks ago, and then we had a couple technical difficulties. So I'm so grateful for him coming back on the podcast. I met George in 2014 at the Tactical Annual Training when it was being held in San Diego. And I believe George's topic was basically, we're working too hard, we're overtraining, we're not recovering hard enough as firefighters. And he introduced this concept to me of heart rate variability, which was new to me. So I was really grateful for that. But I felt a connection with George, and he invited anyone and everyone to reach out afterwards. And I did. I'm really glad I did because he has been a wonderful mentor to me. And one more fun fact, George was on a podcast, and it was the first podcast I ever listened to. So it's a full circle, George. Here you are on my podcast. Welcome.
That's pretty cool.
It is cool. We already had a lot of good conversation going on. And so I just want to get the listeners your 3 fast facts really quickly. Who is Jorge Carvajal?
I like to think of myself as someone who is an explorer. I like to exploring. I like to figure things out. That's at the heart of what coaching is, right?
Absolutely. So I'm sure your answer for the next one might be similar, but what sets your soul on fire?
Helping people.
Yeah, me too.
That's always a simple one. That could have a different look in very many different ways, but at the core of it, I think just helping people. It's just a great feeling to be able to help another human being.
How are you changing the world?
Hopefully one person at a time, right? I try to focus if I'm working with somebody to give them my undivided attention and try to make the change that needs to be made, and then let them go out and pay it forward in other ways and just continue that cycle. I think that cycle is, I think it's needed, and I think it's beautiful to be able to just continue helping people in very many different ways.
I think that is beautiful. And we're going to come back to your brain because we're talking about the headphones and we're talking about all kinds of things with your brain. And we're going to come back to that. But I want to see if you remember a particular conversation that you had with me. After we had the heart rate variability conversation, you invited me to stay in touch, and we periodically would touch base about different training concerns or programs or things like that. But do you remember a day that I reached out and I said, George, I need to talk? We got on a call and I said, George, I don't think I can do this anymore.
Yeah, I remember.
And do you remember the advice that you gave me? It was really smart.
I think you only had 2 paths there, right? Was that the conversation?
Sure is.
Yeah. And it was, you can tie a knot and at the end of your rope and hold on. And that's not easy to do. And the other one was just got to make a change. And it seems very simple, and it is. It's not easy, though.
I know, it's always those things that are simple but not easy. And so at the time, I think I probably didn't wonder enough about how you knew to give me that advice. I think I know now, but how is it that you knew that was basically the 2 paths that I had to choose?
Really simple, because I had been there. I think when you're there and you recognize it and you see it and you taste it, you know right away what it is. And when you recognize it, there's really just, it was so simple, because those are the choices that were given to me. Is I can tie a rope and hang on, and that's okay if that's your choice. If you remember, that's part of what I told you, is whatever your choice you make, that's okay. There's no mistakes. It's just a path, and then that path works or it doesn't work. And if you decide to make the change, that's okay too. For me, it was, I had done both at different times, and they both worked at different times. until they didn't work anymore. And then you have to keep choosing, right? Sometimes it's the same path. But it's interesting because today put out a tweet, it was a thread on why coaches are leaving coaching. And it was a fabulous thread. It's 10 different stories of these high profile coaches who got to a point and burnt out or had whatever problems they had. One in press conference just kept saying, I'm just done. I'm done. He had no other answer except he knew what he didn't want to do anymore. And that's not your, let me tie a knot at the end of the rope. That's I got to leave. But it was fascinating because after that, I retweeted and I put at the end, hey, I've been here. I know what this is. I have some answers. If you want some help, reach out. And I had about 25 different DMs. I didn't expect that. I expected maybe a person maybe in a couple of days would say something. But within a span of, I would say, 2 hours, I had 25 different people message, people that coach. And so that's a bit of an N equals 1. That's not a large percentage, but it's telling that 25 people said, hey, I'm in one of these stories. I don't know what to do. I just know I'm at that point. Either I have to change something or I'm gonna have to tie this knot at the end of this rope. And again, it's a really simple solution. I know it is because I've been there. It's just not easy because both of those demand a choice and a path to take. And it could be a complete lifestyle or it could be changing some variables. But the one common factor there is change, and that's not easy for people.
And so George said he recognized it and he had been there. And what he meant was that he saw that I was burning out because he had been burned out previously. And George, there was a lot wrapped up in burnout. If you don't mind sharing, what did that all look like?
And it's funny because you ticked all the boxes, right? I had these boxes in my head. Not that I had a running list, but I had a list in my head. And every time you said something, you basically ticked all the boxes. And so that told me that. So what it looks like is I go back to Patrick Lencioni's 3 signs of a miserable job, which is anonymity, irrelevance, and immeasurability. You have no ability to be able to measure what you're doing. You're irrelevant in an organization. And worst of all, which I think is, it hurts someone to the core of their being, is being anonymous. When you feel like you're in those 3 things, and those 3 things lead to burnout, it could lead to stress, it could lead to potentially heart attacks, right? That's how stress kills. But those 3 things, when I read that book, I realized back then, those are all the things that I ticked those boxes for sure. No question about it. I was irrelevant. The job that I was doing was really immeasurable. And again, not to anybody else, but who is the most important person you have to convince that it's relevant and measurable is you. And those 2 things then led to the third thing that was basically the collapse, which is I just felt anonymous. And you have passion for anything. You can't have goals for anything when that is central to your being. You're just thinking, I'm drowning. I need to stop drowning. I can't figure out how to swim to the beach. It's not even possible. I just need to stop drowning. That's where you were. And I recognized right away that you were drowning.
And I think the thing that was most impactful for me is that everyone else that I had expressed concern to, can I talk? Will you listen to me? Every person that I spoke with told me I didn't have a choice. You signed on for the fire service. You have to make it 20 years because you get to the pension in 20 years. You can't quit. I don't know if you realized it at the time, but I think I have told you since that you opening my eyes to the fact that I simply had a choice made a huge difference. Huge.
I think when you tell somebody that, hey, you signed up, it's 20 or 30 years, that is a heavy burden to someone who's already drowning. You're basically pushing them underneath the water. It's not offering a life preserver. You're not offering that'll help them recover from that position. Is you're actually pushing them down under the water. Because at that point, you yourself are telling yourself, there's just no way out. There is no choice. And the answer is, there is a choice. It's not easy, but there is a choice. And the choice is to stop drowning.
That just made me feel sick in the pit of my stomach, but that is so smart the way you put that. I do remember also during this conversation, you offered me a couple of techniques, ideas, possible solutions. And one of those solutions came in the form of you relaying a story about a gift you got from your mom for high school graduation, which at the time you didn't appreciate very much. But can you tell everyone about that gift? Because it's a great story.
Yes, we kept driving when we went to shop for food at a Winn-Dixie. I remember it was Winn-Dixie, this Camaro that I really wanted. And graduation came, and I thought that's what I was going to get, a transcendental meditation course instead. And when she gave me the envelope, she said, "You're not going to understand this for 25 years," which already blew my mind because I got to wait for 25 years. You're in high school. That's not your thinking. And then she gave it to me, and I'd opened it up, and I was surprised in a way, but not, because she had always been a meditator. Meditation was the way that she dealing with migraines. She'd get in a dark room, close the blinds, and meditate. She wouldn't take medication. She wanted to try and overcome it through her own means. And it worked very well, and it changed her in many ways. And I think that those changes she saw that were important as I was starting my life. I went through the course, Mantra, which is part of TM. And then it took 25 or 30 years for me to understand it. She knew.
So mom hit it out of the park. It just took you a good couple of decades to appreciate it.
She prefaced the entire story by saying exactly that. It's going to take you for 30 years. I remember she said specifically 25 or 30 years.
And it did. That's amazing. So I remember you telling me a little bit about when you were relating to me and saying, "I see you, I've been here, I have been at Burnout." Do you remember you also saying that you had one or more traumatic brain injuries, which were really becoming worrisome for you? How did you get on the other side of those TBIs, or do you never get on the other side of them?
So it was one traumatic brain injury and 4 concussions. Back then, there was no concussion protocols. Even TBI injuries were put out to pasture. There really was no protocol. They didn't understand the brain or recovery of the brain. And so I had a really, really good neurologist. I remember that. He was very kind, and sometimes was very sad because he couldn't help me. And he couldn't help the patients. This is what I do, but I'm like, I can't help you anymore. I remember most of the stuff would had to do with pain medication because pain was part of it. But nobody really talked about, how do you come out of this? 1, 2, can you come out of this? And the more I suffered, the more I realized, until one day I was walking through the threshold of the house I was living in. And there was walking through some French doors that divided the kind of office space from the back room where we watch TV. And I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to live like this anymore. I just don't want to live like this anymore. There was no solution. There was no help. But I was in a period where I did not have pain. I had these cycles of pain that would come and go. And as I was crossing and I was going into the bedroom, I thought, I don't have pain. I don't have pain right now. So that means that pain is part of this process, but it's not all of the process. I'm not that pain. I don't have to suffer. And I think it's a conversation you have about suffering, right? Suffering is you wanting things to be different than what they are. And so I decided to allow the pain while not suffer. And so I allowed myself to have the pain, didn't suffer. I just realized it was coming, and I did the best that I could with it. And then I get up and go back and work or do whatever else I needed to do. And slowly that changed the way things. And I thought, I can recover, but it's going to take me to recover. Nobody's going to want me to recover more than me, because nobody knows those dark nights in a room with severe crushing head pain, what that's like. Nobody cares. Yeah, nobody really cares. They're doing their own thing. They're living their own life. And so I have to figure it out. And so I set upon a path to try and figure it out, because I had no choice. It was that or continue to live with that kind of Buddhist mentality, if you will, of I'm going to have pain but not suffer. And how long is that sustainable? How long can I? And then little by little, I start to figure it out.
And what did figuring it out look like? Were there treatment protocols or did it just take time and perseverance?
The more I read about the brain and people who had very bad brain injuries was number one, time. Is I had to be very patient. If you know me, patience is not my greatest virtue. And so it was almost like I got this injury that could have been not just the worst injury, but the personality and the characteristic that you need to recover from that injury. I did not. I had to learn patience. So number one on the prescription protocol was be patient. That's not easy. It's super, super hard for someone who's not patient. But that also taught me that, okay, so that's number one. Number two is I need to sit more. This is when the meditation started to come in more and more a factor, is sitting by myself, quiet time, so that then I had a choice between stimulus and response. And that choice started to elongate more and more, where if I had a stimulus, I didn't respond or I didn't react, I could mount a response. And that was a conscious choice. That led to less pain and less suffering. And then little by little, I just adjusted to a couple different things. One was, at the time, the only thing that kind of really brought me, I wouldn't say pain relief, but overall, I usually was not in pain when I was out there. Sometimes I was, but it was very minor. But I realized that floating, one of the things I enjoyed is I would fall off the side of the board and put my arms on the board, let my body stay vertical in the water, and I would just float. And I could float for hours. I did tomorrow or yesterday or what I was going to eat or people on the beach. I didn't have any thoughts. I don't know if you've never been there, if you don't understand that, it's very difficult to understand that. How can you have no thoughts? But I didn't think. And so I thought to recreate that, I looked for a place that had flotation tank, because I couldn't be in the water in the ocean, but I could probably float here or there. And I started floating about 30 minutes a day, or minutes every other day, and 60. And when I went to 60 a couple times a week, it's almost like the brain started to heal itself. And that's very anecdotal, because I did have an MRI before and after, and the MRI was completely different. The areas of the brain that had been damaged were somewhat healed, not fully, but there was different blood flow. There was new areas of blood flow, and I had done nothing different than except float in the ocean and float in a flotation tank. In one place, and actually, I think it was Florida at the time, but it was in Boca Raton. I think it was Florida Atlantic University, and they had this huge thing that looked. If you ever see the movie Altered States with William Hurt, he is doing an experiment where he floats, and they basically regress back in time, and it's this giant cylindrical thing, and it was exactly like that. It was very primitive, but it was salt water. It allowed you to stay buoyant and get the benefit of floating. And the more I floated, the more I recovered. And so I just became a fan of let's float more. And I tried different vitamins and minerals and diet protocol, the meditation, the floating, and then at some point CBD oil was part of a recovery process. And I came out the other end, not unscathed. To your point of, do you ever recover? I think you always have. There's some symptoms that I think I'll probably have the rest of my life. The brain is not supposed to be concussed. The brain is not supposed to undergo a traumatic brain injury. It just isn't. We're very resilient, right? As human beings, the brain and the body is very resilient. It's just not meant to happen. And I think even when I see someone is riding a bike or something without a helmet, I just think that one fall, it's a lifelong injury. It's not an injury for a year or two. You may never recover again. You may never be the same person, depending on what kind of treatment and stuff. Obviously, it's more prevalent now to have concussion protocols, and concussion therapy and treatment and protocols are night and day compared to there. But at the end of the day, the brain is not supposed to be concussed. It's just not.
And in my population in particular, well, police, fire, and military, we have that high incidence of maybe not major traumatic brain injuries, but those minor TBIs that just continue to add up. And the research is telling us that those minor TBIs may be predictive of PTSD, which could be predictive of suicidal ideation. So for my firefighters out there, you got to be careful of your brain. And if you do take a clonk to the head, that's a technical term, clonk to the head. If you do take a hit to the head, you do really need to follow those protocols and get it checked out. I know I've had several minor TBIs, which we never followed any protocols.
No, and it's a little bit more like the whole concept of mental health, right? It's okay now to ask for help. It's still, I don't think, for those professions, specifically police, fire, military, it's not an en vogue thing to do. But I think it's a little bit more accepted. Same with this, is you have to follow up. You have to follow up. It makes such a huge difference if you can start any kind of treatment that you would not have ever thought of. Most people just take ibuprofen and go to bed with searing headaches for a couple of weeks, and then they come out of it. But do you really come out of it? And the answer is no, you don't.
No, I don't think you do. Speaking again of, I'll call them my population, I want to get your perspective on this, George. So we'll go back to me, which I am almost a 20-year veteran. And the message that I received was, you can't quit, you have to stick it out. That's one end of the pendulum. And now on the opposite end of the pendulum, we're finding that for a variety of reasons, our younger firefighters are getting into the job and then jumping from department to department, or maybe getting into the job and then not liking it and getting out, which I respect that very much. But do you have any perspective on maybe comparing this to strength and conditioning, why these young firefighters may be jumping around from department to department?
I think part of it is because when you and I started, right, you see those professions as a calling, right? You see it as a career, quote unquote. And what I see and what I hear and what gets brought back to me, and I think you know this to be true, is that this has become police, fire, military, maybe not so much, but yes, because of GI Bill and all the financial things that are able to be taken advantage of, it's a job, right? And if it's a job, you're looking for the job that gives you the best benefits, right? And it's not the same candidate that you had 20 years ago that came in and is that this is a calling. Those are completely different mentalities, right? Something that this is my calling versus this is my job. It could be, and it is for many people, one and the same. It is not for everybody. But you'll have people come in and they see it as this is just the job. And if something else comes up and pays a little bit better and they don't have to risk their life, they're out the door. They're right out the door. Those that are in it for different reasons, it's a job, it's a calling, can understand that because they can't see themselves doing anything else. They love what they do. That's the word you hear. I love what I do. But it's a different generation. It's a different mentality. And it's almost like they're looking for the quick buck. They're not willing to stay and sacrifice and do the work. And that's not a blanket statement. That's true. Not everybody, but it's very prevalent. It's there.
I read something, I think it was on Twitter recently, maybe Instagram, who knows, but it just basically said it's 2022. People aren't going to work in places that they don't enjoy their job anymore. And so for me, if I'm going to play devil's advocate right now. So I'm the administration of a fire department, and I really want to retain quality candidates and I want to treat my employees really well. I think personally, offering them a comprehensive health and wellness program with someone to coach them would be really valuable. And so I do know that you specialize in training a variety of athletes. So you have your surfers, which is pretty cool. And you have your special operations people in the military. And then you also train firefighters. Let's talk about training firefighters from this perspective of a coach. What are we looking for in terms of relating to those individuals, training them, and getting them out the door as healthy and happy as they possibly can be at the end of their career?
to your first point about offering what you need to offer, you offer comprehensive benefits like another job does. That's the problem, is the benefits are somewhat better somewhere, they jump. And the thing that they have that maybe other people did not have, come out of high school and you're either going to the military, you're going to college, or you're going to be a police or firefighter. So you don't have a lot of choices. There's a lot of choices now. So that's that. I think for those people, even starting now, and that there's there's the program that you come out of when you in recruit training, right? So that's the really young buck, if you want to call it that. The veteran has been on for 10 or 15 years. And then you have the individual that's in the twilight years about to head out. Those are three different programs. Those are not the same programs. They could be all encompassing. You can downsize, tailor, and change those programs depending on the individual, and you want to make them very individualized. But those are three different programs. And I think one of the things that everybody does when they start, for many people, is recruit is brutal. And so this overtraining, under recovery. I'm not a big believer in overtraining. I've never seen anybody overtrain in 30 years. I just never have. And I'm talking elite operators and elite athletes. I've seen thousands of people under recovery. There's a difference. And so they're so under recovered from recruit training that it's almost like they've seen exercise as punishment, because in most recruit classes, exercise is used as punishment. And then they basically wipe themselves free and clean of the sin of exercise, and you lose them. And you can never get them back because you taught them that exercise is punishment, and it's not. You need exercise. You need a certain capacity, like we were talking before, in order to do this job. There are physical demands that you have to meet and qualify for in order to be able to be a good firefighter, for example. Same with the other two levels, right? The guy that's been doing the job for a certain while needs a certain amount of strength, needs some aerobic endurance. He needs work capacity. That is the guy that's on the job and continuously putting out the fire, pulling action to quarter, going in, masking up, and putting out the fire. And then you have the guy that basically doesn't do that anymore. It could be a battalion chief, or it could be just an older guy in an older station that maybe needs a little bit more aerobic endurance and aerobic work and some mobility work. But all those people need the very same thing at different and varying levels. They need aerobic work, they need work capacity, they need strength. It's just in varying degrees of intensity and volume, depending on where they're at in their career and what's going on. You certainly don't want to train the guy who's been on for 15 years, same as a 22-year-old guy who got out of recruit class. They're just two different human beings, body-wise, right? They have different recovery abilities. And I think when I started to work with firefighters, myself included, is one of the biggest mistakes I made was I tried to hit all these variables with capacity, strength, right? And aerobic work. And I tried to fit those all in a week. The problem is that if you work a 24, let's say 48-hour shift, right? You're working about 3 days a week out of a 7-day, and you're trying to put all those things in, but you haven't slept for 2 of those shifts. So you always have this residual fatigue that you're dealing with, and you're trying to fit in all these, tick all these boxes. And from a standpoint of logistics, it doesn't work. You're making more inroads into your recovery than you're actually recovering from. And so one of the things I found to be really beneficial is to create 9 to 14-day training cycles. I like to separate strength and conditioning on separate days. I don't like to do it on the same day. If I have to do it, I'll do after strength. Strength is the most important variable to me. But when you spread it out now over a course of 9, 10, 14 days, if you're doing 3 strength workouts and 3 conditioning workouts, now you have time to do that work, and you have time to be able to recover from that residual fatigue. If you're residually fatigued all the time and you're adding conditioning and strength on top of that, you'll never recover, because most people already have in those professions, sleep problems. It's just very prevalent. So if you're not sleeping, you're not recovering, you're just basically killing yourself little by little, right? You're micro dying, what I call, on a daily basis. You're not recovering from the work. You're not making adaptations Whatever you're doing isn't transferring to the occupation because you're tired, fatigued all the time. But when you elongate that period of work where you allow for fatigue so that you can sleep for the day, hey, you know what? I'm just going to go for a walk today. That is today's workout. Recover, do some mobility stuff. Tomorrow, have a good, let's say tonight, have a good 8 or 9 hours of sleep, whatever it is that you normally get, hopefully somewhere between 7 and 9. And then you can wake up and have your strength workout. And then you're back to work. There's nothing to say that you can't do work on duty. A lot of people don't like it, and that's okay. You can do some conditioning, you can do some strength, whatever it is, but you just elongate the ability to recover from that fatigue. And that seems to have worked really well. I brought it in a peer fitness trainer course. I brought it out for the first time because I didn't want to share it because I didn't know how people would take it, because we've all kind of grown up on the 7-day work week. And so this is asking people to expand their mind, their awareness to something different. And to this day, I still get emails. I just got one the other day from people who said that changed my life, like realizing that it was okay. I don't have to build all these things in the 7-day cycle. It doesn't work for me, but nobody's told me that I can do something else. So I told them, yes, you can. Here's how you do it. And to this day, I still get, it's fascinating. It's amazing, but it's really satisfying to know that made a difference. And it really works very well. It works with military guys. That's what I do, is I'll do block training, but that block is not necessarily based on a week. It could be, I'm using 9 and 10-day cycles now, and it seems the guys are just recovered. And how do I know that? They're sleeping better. Their recovery questionnaires are through the roof. Their HRV is better. Everything's better. They're less injured when they get deployed. It seems like it's working very well.
And as you were talking, George, that training while under recovered, I think the best analogy we could maybe use is it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each
That's
individual
perfect.
day
Perfect.
doesn't really have that big of an impact, but after day in and day out, it has a huge impact. That I love the 9 to 14-day cycle. And it's funny, as you were speaking, I was thinking, is it George that told me about that, or did I hear that somewhere else? So I'm glad you brought that up. So all of you that are listening, really consider that 7 days is very arbitrary. And especially if you are on a 24-48 or a 48-72 schedule, lengthening out that program is going to make a lot more sense. More recovery is better.
And if you think about all of the articles, and I would say not 90%, but 100% of the articles that are written out there are written for people that are not doing shift work. And so you're trying to place yourself in the square peg into the round hole, and it doesn't fit, but you keep trying. The reason is it doesn't fit. All of those articles, all those programs that are written out are based on a 7-day cycle, and none of them take into consideration shift. Not a single one. I've never heard of one. I've never read one in 30 years, unless it was specifically written for shift workers. It's just not. That's not the industry. That is not who the industry supports. The industry supports the regular 9 to 5 person or the college student that has some time during the day to train, and they sleep at night every single night. That is not shift work.
It's absolutely not shift work. And I think the reason that I am such a proponent of sleep as the first intervention, when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to start a program, I think sleep is just the place to start, because I say it a lot, but everything gets better when you sleep.
Sleep is the number one recovery tool. It's not Normatec boots. It's not post-workout shakes. It's not even mobility stuff. It's sleep. You have to get that right. I have a sleep contract, and I will not work with somebody unless they're willing to sleep a certain amount of time. And then we monitor it through an app, and it's zero tolerance. I can't help you if you're not sleeping, because if you're not sleeping, you're not recovering. If you're not recovering, you can't take the program. It just doesn't work.
I like that. Drawing a hard line. Sleep is that important to
Yeah,
George.
that is the way that you impress the importance of it. Is it's really that important? The answer is yes. I'm not willing even to train somebody if they're not willing to sleep. It's just, it doesn't work. I know that. I don't have to try and figure it out. I know it doesn't work.
That's really funny. I have a parallel with that, which is for the last 18 years, I've been trying to be very inclusive when I talk to people. And address departments that refuse to spend money and departments that will spend money and those that will allocate time and those that won't allocate time. And I've just come down to this this is my vision. Your department will allocate time and they will understand that it does cost money, or I'm sorry, I can't help you. So I guess I've drawn a hard line in the sand too.
Yeah, the most important resources for departments is their people. It's not the equipment. It's always been their people. And if you're not willing to invest in those people, depending on who it is and who I'm talking to, you may not want to take that job because you're just a cog in the wheel. You'll be replaced very quickly. The standard's not going to change, and their focus is always going to be the equipment. The equipment doesn't run unless you have good people. And so those good departments have invested in wellness fitness because they know that the asset they have is their people.
And the return on investment is huge. And we can all agree, everyone listening, even if you don't have any knowledge of the fire service, you can agree that it's really important to maintain those ladder trucks that cost upwards of $1.5 million. It is important to have a plan for working on those trucks and replacing the tires. Understood. But during the course of my career, I'm going to be a several $1 million investment too. So spending a small amount of money on maintaining me is a great investment. How do we convince departments of this, George?
It's maintenance. There's a certain budget allocated for maintenance of the equipment. There should be a certain budget allocated for the main personnel. We're not talking about rocket science here, but what most departments do is they basically out the maintenance of the personnel to the personnel. That's what they do, is they go out and do your own thing because it's important to be fit to fight fire, but they don't give you resource or allocate the resources for you to do that. It's incumbent upon you. No disagreement there. You know what you signed up for, but there should be an allocation of resources for you to be able to have the same kind of maintenance that they provide for the trucks. It's you put it beautifully, it's a return of your investment. The return of the investment is the people, it's not the trucks. Trucks break down.
Yeah, and people do too.
And people do too. And so the most important valuable asset there is the trucks you can throw away. You can't throw away people. You can hire new people, but then what does that really say about the organization, culture, and stuff like that?
Yeah, we don't want our people to be disposable.
No.
So, George, I want to be super respectful of your time, especially since we recorded more than once. And so we'll start winding down. I want you to tell me, is there anything that you would like to share that I didn't ask you about or you think is a great gem or nugget for the people listening today?
I think you hit all of the things that you thought was important. And specifically, we hadn't touched on it last time, but the building of that expanded leak, I think, is probably the most important message I can put out there is you can do it, right? It all depends on when you work. If you work at a station where if we're talking about the fire service, where you sleep all night, then that's an easy solution. But that's not the majority of the fire service across the country, right? You have sleepless nights, you have trucks running 6-7 calls after midnight. You have to be able to deal with that residual fatigue. And I think being able to tell people that you can elongate that 7-day cycle into 9, 10, or a 2-week cycle, right? You're not going to lose your muscles, bro. That's not the way it works. It gives you actually more of an opportunity to produce better results with performance, aesthetics, whatever it is, because with residual fatigue, if the body's dealing with residual fatigue all the time, there's no stimulus for growth. It's just simple physics and science and chemistry, right? So I think that was something I really wanted to touch on that we didn't last time, that I thought was really important, because I just got an email, someone saying, hey man, I don't know if you remember me. And of course I did. It was a firefighter from Orlando that said, I was in the class and you brought this up. And I think it had to do something with, I think maybe something I put out on Twitter with respect to that. And he said, it just changed my life. And I get that continuously, because now you're allowed to change your program design. It doesn't have to be based on 7 days. It could be whatever you want to. And when you start sleeping more and recovering from that residual fatigue, and you're able to lift heavier or run farther, whatever it is that where your KPI is, your key performance indicator, it makes a huge difference. And I think that's a really important conversation for specifically people who do shift work.
avoid that death by 1,000 paper cuts, 100%. So I believe, George, you are the most active on Twitter,
Correct.
and you are Carve Performance on Twitter. Is that right?
On Twitter. Correct.
All right. So I'll put that in the show notes. And I'm just so grateful for you taking your time again
I
with me,
appreciate it.
George.
Thank you.
I appreciate you so much. I periodically send you a text or an email just to remind you how important you've been to me. But I just want all the listeners to know this is a great man, and I appreciate him so very much. So for the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast, this has been AZ and Jorge Carvajal, and we are officially out.